Hi, this is Clare and welcome to another Hero Arts video. Today I'm going to show you how I made this card stamping the easiest plaid background ever. So to start with, we're going to take the Candy Stripes Bold Prints background and we're going to stamp it onto our card base. Whenever I stamp backgrounds, I always like to score my cardstock but not fold it because I always get a cleaner impression on that folded edge of the card if I don't actually fold the cardstock before I stamp my background. So I'm just masking off the back of the card base though, just to make sure that no unwanted ink gets over there. So I inked up my background using Tide Pool ink, and then I just stamped it. There's no fancy way of doing that. I just made sure that when I was stamping it, I used my clear block to kind of act as a brayer of sorts and make sure that I applied even pressure everywhere. And particularly around the edges, I like to make sure that I'm pressing particularly hard. So for the second impression, I used ocean ink. And when I stamped this, I stamped the stripes going the opposite direction. And that gives you this perfectly aligned, beautiful plaid background. You don't have to worry about aligning all these individual stripes. It's all done for you. It's amazing. Unfortunately, I can't take credit for the idea, but kind of wish I could, but it's still really fun. So now for the panel, the front panel of the card base, or the card, I'm inking up my polar bear using some charcoal ink because I thought it would be a little less stark than using black ink. And now I'm going to be doing some masking. It'll look kind of intense at first, but when you see the final result, you'll see that it kind of just looks more intense than it actually is. So to start out with this masking process, first I need to make a little guide. So I'm using my circle die, the same die that I used to die cut into this masking tape, to just kind of use as a template and use my pencil to lightly mark around. And then I place my masking tape that I die cut into right below the polar bear, using that pencil line as a guide. That piece of masking tape will mask off the bottom of the card, and for the sides I'm just adding some strips of masking tape just to make sure that I don't get any unwanted ink anywhere. And then for the polar bear itself, to make sure I don't ink up the polar bear, I'm adding a strip of masking tape over it too, but I'm cutting the bottom of it at a little bit of a curve to create the slope for this little snowdrift. And then I just go in with that charcoal ink and I blend my ink, and then I've got this nice snowdrift. I guess it's not really a snowdrift since it's not white, it's gray, but anyway, for the sake of the card and being able to tell that there was a drift there. I'm going to be doing some partial die cutting now. And so for partial die cutting, basically the key is that you make sure that for your plates, if you do not want a piece of your die to cut somewhere, then you make sure that the plates aren't sandwiched over that part of the die. So for this panel, I made sure that the top plate wasn't covering that snowdrift. It was covering everything else but not the snowdrift. The snowdrift kind of stuck out, kind of jutted out of the sandwich right there. And since the top plate wasn't covering it, when I rolled it through my machine, no pressure was applied there, so the die couldn't die cut. So now that I have that all die cut and I cut around my polar bear, I just use a gray marker to add some extra definition around the polar bear to make sure that the lines were really crisp. So for the scarf, I wanted to make sure that it was an exact color match with the background. So to do that, I just use ocean ink, the same ink that I used for the second layer of the background. And then I just basically cover a piece of scrap paper with that ink. It's super saturated, which is why I set it off to the side and give it some time to dry. So that's just a tip for any cards that you might make. If you don't have a cardstock that perfectly matches your ink color, then you can use your ink to make sure that you have a perfectly coordinating and matched cardstock. So I'm using the Winter Scene stamp set and coordinating die set on this card to add some little extra touches. I die cut the trees out of some vellum, and I haven't adhered those yet. I'm just setting them off to the side. I actually went over and stamped some snow using my glue pad, and I'm going to add some glitter later. For my sentiment, I wanted to make sure that, well, I didn't want to use white, that would be too stark, but I wanted to use a darker gray. But I didn't have a darker gray than my charcoal ink. So what I do in situations like this is I ink up my sentiment or my image, whatever I'm using. I ink it up with Versamark first, because Versamark, just because of the properties of the ink pad, it's just going to make that whatever you're stamping a slightly bit darker than whatever color the paper is below it. So first I ink up my sentiment using Versamark. Then I go over with charcoal ink, the same ink that I used to blend that snowdrift, and then I stamp. So then I cover everything with clear embossing powder, and that makes sure that the sentiment really stands out. So with the combination of the Versamark lending a darker tone and then the clear embossing powder on top of it, it just helps the sentiment to really kind of pop. So I added my glitter there, and now I'm just going to adhere those vellum trees, kind of eyeball where they go. And now I'm going to stamp the scarf of the polar bear. I'm using the same charcoal ink, and then I'm taking that piece of cardstock that we saturated with ink, and I'm just going to stamp that, cut it out, and adhere it to my polar bear. I do recommend using a dry adhesive unless you've given the cardstock a lot of time to dry, because the cardstock, at least at this point for me, since I didn't heat dry it, it was still kind of moist, so I don't know, I like to use dry adhesive in that case. So the panel is pretty much done, except we just need to adhere the front to the plaid background. And I'm using just some foam, and the back of the foam is nice, it already has adhesive to it, so I just need to cover the front of it with my adhesive gun. And then I just add some little pieces behind the polar bear to make sure that he doesn't kind of fall back later. And that pretty much finishes up the card. I actually made a second card that doesn't use the whole, or utilize the whole partial die cutting process. So if that was kind of complicated or confusing, then for this card all you need to do is die cut the circle out of the front white panel and then stick that on top of your background. So the polar bear and the snowdrift are actually part of the background of the card. They're actually on the card base, whereas that circle, the white panel, is right on top of it. So there's no partial die cutting involved. A lot simpler, a lot easier. And this is actually the card that I made for the video. So if you have any questions or comments, then you can leave them in the YouTube channel, or you can leave them on the blog and I'll try to answer them. And supplies are listed on the blog. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day. God bless. Bye.